Hey guys, so in this video I'm going to be installing power steering on my 1965 C10, uh, which is really running great and it's really become almost my daily driver. Um, so this video is different from the rest of the power steering installs two ways. First, this is a 6-cylinder engine. Most of the kits out there, or all that I could find, do not have brackets for a 6-cylinder. Had to search after that separately. Hopefully it's going to work. And the second thing is, while I'm installing the power steering box, I'm going to be adding a collapsible steering, which is supposed to be that much safer. And as long as I'm in there, may as well do it. Okay, so here's the completed project. You can see the power steering pump secured with a aftermarket bracket, which I'll describe in the video. The hydraulic lines leading down under the sheet metal, which was bent up to prevent any cutting of the hoses. Here's the new power steering box with the rag joint and the collapsible intermediate shaft, the U-joint, and then going up to the lower shaft bearing. And on the top side, steering wheel held to the shaft with a retaining nut. The complete power steering conversion kit from Classic Performance Parts, CPP, included bracket for a V8, which I didn't need, and was not really available. It was back ordered. So I basically pieced together the basic power steering kit, the power steering pump and reservoir kit, and the hoses that go along with the pump, and the required new pitman arm. And I got all these parts from Summit Racing, and they were in stock, ready to ship. The basic power steering install kit comes with an intermediate shaft and flange that turns out to be the same intermediate shaft as the one you see in their collapsible steering shaft. The installation instructions suggest cutting off the double D portion of the intermediate shaft and just using what remains of the round shaft and pinning it with a bolt or spring pin. Rather than do that, we're going to add a double D shaft and universal to basically make our own collapsible steering shaft. We'll then cut the original steering shaft and connect it to the U-joint, which is hooked up to the new double D steering shaft. The engine in my 1965 C10 is actually a 1968 Chevy engine, and this is the bracket that I purchased on eBay. The engine fits the time frame, so should fit perfectly. Okay, so the power steering pump bracket came in today, and I located a diagram that coincides with the parts I got. So the bolts look like they would all line up right with the holes, but unfortunately the exhaust manifold right here sticks out a little bit too far and basically interfered with the bracket attaching. So we had to return that bracket, and we'll go for the aftermarket bracket that's supposed to fit all 230 and 250 engines. Here's the eBay listing for the second bracket that I tried. So here you see the parts that came from Davis Speed Equipment. really impressed. I mean, these parts are made of 1/4-inch steel. The welds are really nice and clean, and I checked the fit. The fit's going to be perfect. Okay, power steering pump installed, and I think you can see here, this is a really sturdy bracket. This is not going anywhere. All right, so we took the tire and wheel off for better access, and now we're going to go forward and try to remove the old steering box. We'll have to break the ball joint here, and we can leave the pitman arm on the steering box since we're going to use a new pitman arm with the new steering box. And then once we break that ball joint, we'll cut the steering shaft some convenient place just to give us some clearance for the new steering box, which sticks out a little further. All right, so we're able to break the ball joint loose with a ballpoint puller, and next we'll cut the steering shaft and remove the steering box. Okay, we'll have to cut it further up later, but this will give us room to take off the old steering box and also install the new one. All right, the old one is out. You see there, and boy, I was real happy to have that air impact wrench. It was a struggle getting those nuts off. So this fender brace is actually in the way of the support bracket that we're going to try to install. So we'll have to loosen it and grind away a little bit of it so that we can get that plate to fit. Okay, so we marked what we have to cut off in order to fit the plate. And we'll just use our cutoff wheel and cut that off. All right, so we removed that fender bracket for the time being. We cleaned up the steel so we have a nice flat surface to work with, and we mounted the adapter plate with a 1/2-inch bolt up high and a 7/16 bolt in the lower right-hand corner. So now we'll have to drill out the upper right and the upper left holes. The lower left is a threaded hole, and a bolt will go through the hole in the new power steering box where we drilled out the threads, and the bolt will thread in to this little guy here with the threads. We're figuring out what to do with the steering shaft. Applied a little bit of Rust-Oleum to the bare metal where we cleaned the frame for the new adapter plate. All right, so we have the new steering box mounted just temporarily so that we can measure and cut the steering column to the correct length for our collapsible shaft. Right, so we have the new power steering box installed. We did trim the fender brace a little bit, and when we put it in, we just got 1 or 2 bolts in loose and jiggle it around to install the pitman arm loosely, then continued the power steering box install, and after it was nice and snug, we tightened up on the nut below the power steering box and the ball joint castle nut. And doing a little research, that castle nut was torqued to 50 foot-pounds. Assembling the rag joint to the intermediate shaft, the nuts do have lock washers, but in addition we put some thread lock on the threads just to be extra safe. And then we went ahead and installed the intermediate shaft with the stainless double D shaft inside, and we'll do some final trimming once we get the steering column back together.
Okay, so today we install the hydraulic lines for the power steering. So here you can see I bent the sheet metal up so I wouldn't have a sharp edge rubbing against the power steering hose. That would not be good. And we have no leaks up on top of the pump. No leaks. Power steering box. What I was hoping would be a weekend project is turning out to be a little more. Here you can see the steering shaft, even cut short, is not true. You can see it's in there. And to confirm it, the bearing, which I'd replaced only a little while ago, is clearly oblong. It's worn and yeah, not good. We got some work ahead of us. Just by pure happenstance, I found this shaft on eBay, which turns out to work perfectly. The overall length is 37.5 inches, which is long enough to just get through the column and come out into the engine bay. One end is suited for a GM steering wheel. It has 11/16 36 spline followed by threads to hold the steering wheel retaining nut. The other end has a 3/4 36 spline with a notch, which will be perfect for the U-joint connecting to the double D part of the collapsible shaft. In a previous video, when I was rebuilding the steering shaft and steering column, I suggested that a brass bushing would be a good upgrade from the bearing which originally came. And I'm going to retract that statement, and here's why. When the bearing is in the holder and you use this spring with a slight pressure to keep it in place, and then that is clamped onto the steering shaft. Now, the steering shaft, the clamp, the spring, and the inner race all turn with the shaft. If this was a bronze bushing, you don't have an inner and outer race, and while the rod, the spring, and the clamp turn, the bushing staying in place, you would, and in fact, in my case, did wear down the outer surface of the bronze bushing. So while I did not use the bronze bushing, I did replace the lower bearing and housing with a 69 to 72 kit. I think you can see here the housing for the bearing is quite a bit sturdier and more robust in the later edition, 6972. Both housings have the identical outside diameter. They have the threaded holes for the clip and securing the housing to the column. And the bearing itself is also more robust. One thing nice about the shorter steering shaft is that it can fit from inside the cabin without having to remove the column. Saves a lot of work. So you might ask how I got the lower bearing in place. Even though the inside is a loose fit, 3/4 inch, there was an O-ring in there which kind of prevented getting it on. So I basically used 3/4 inch PVC pipe to help get it in place, and a little soft mallet pushed it till it was past the serrated edges and onto the shaft, and it went on quite nicely. Here you can see the turn signal cancel cam that is attached to the bottom of the steering wheel. And this inner tube right here rests on the inner race of the upper shaft bearing. So the shaft, steering wheel, and the spring and clamp at the lower bearing all turn together smoothly in the two bearings. So here you can see the steering wheel is secured to the shaft with a retaining nut. And the clamp holding the spring to the inner race of the lower bearing basically keeps the bearing in place, but also with slight pressure draws the steering wheel down so the cancel cam inner tube rests on the inner race of the upper bearing. And as you can see, the shaft is secure in place and the steering wheel rotates very smoothly and easily. So this shaft that I found, 37.5 inches, is going to work out perfect. So you can see you got the lower bearing installed, a little spring retainer and a clip to hold it in place. I got a 3/4 36 spline with a cutout on this end, and I've got my 3/4 DD here. So this will come up here, meet at a U-joint like so, and this distance is right about 8 inches, 8.5 inches, so leaving 2 inches for overlap to get a good secure interface. Then this distance from here to the bottom of the U-joint will be just over 6 inches, so it works out to be just about a perfect fit. Sure wish I knew where that shaft came from.
We'll drill a hole in the double D stainless shaft that slides into this lower section, and we'll insert a nylon 832 machine screw as a shear pin. That'll break away in an accident, but it's strong enough to hold the shaft if the steering wheel is removed. This will allow basically maintenance to change out your turn signal switch or the cancel cam, or to even just change your steering wheel.
Okay, so now you can see everything pretty much lines up right. The rag joint is all the way down to the steering box with the alignment screw there keeping it in place. We put in a metal 8/32 screw for now. We'll put in a nylon later, and the little divots in the double D fit perfectly for the set screws, so we have a nice solid connection there. Now with everything tight, we can remove the steering wheel and reposition it, and that little 832 machine screw will hold the shaft from collapsing while we do that. Well, I put a couple hundred miles on a truck since getting the power steering going, and I gotta say the project's a complete success. I really love it. Now the only question is whether I'm going to stay with this 17-inch wheel or swap it out for a 15-inch aftermarket wheel. To be determined.